The strangest moments in life never announce themselves. They simply brush against your shoulder, and everything you believed about your future disappears. I had learned to recognize people by their footsteps long before I learned to stop wishing I could see their faces. Leather shoes clicked with confidence. Sneakers bounced with impatience. High heels carried stories they never intended to tell. That rainy Thursday night, every sound along Lexington Avenue blended into a restless symphony of tires cutting through puddles, distant sirens, umbrellas snapping open, and strangers rushing towards somewhere they believed mattered more than where they already were. My white cane tapped carefully across the sidewalk while cool October rain settled softly on my coat. The city smelled like wet concrete, roasted chestnuts from a food cart half a block away, and fresh coffee drifting from a cafe preparing to close. I smiled without realizing it. Rain had always made New York sound kinder. People spoke more softly. Cars slowed down. Even the wind seemed to carry a gentler rhythm. My name is Clara Whitmore. I was born with limited vision and lost the last traces of light before my 12th birthday. Most people looked at me and saw darkness. I never did. My world simply learned different colors. I heard kindness before I trusted it. I recognized fear through silence. I could tell when someone smiled because their breathing changed ever so slightly. Earlier that evening, I had finished volunteering at a music program for blind children downtown. Teaching piano wasn't just my job. It reminded me every week that people could lose one sense without losing hope. My students laughed louder than anyone else I knew. They believed every note deserved to be heard, even the wrong ones. Maybe life worked the same way. Maybe mistakes carried people somewhere they never planned to go. My apartment was only another 15-minute walk. I knew every uneven crack in the sidewalk, every subway vent that released warm air onto the street, every bakery that filled the neighborhood with cinnamon before sunrise. Familiar places made the city feel small enough to trust. Then something changed. The traffic noise faded. Not because fewer cars were passing, but because engines had stopped moving altogether. Conversations disappeared one voice after another until only the rain remained. It wasn't normal silence. It felt intentional, almost respectful, as if an invisible curtain had fallen across the entire block. My grip tightened around my cane. Somewhere ahead, several expensive car doors closed almost at the same time. Heavy footsteps spread outward in practiced formation. No one laughed. No one checked their phone. No one hurried across the street. Even without seeing, I could feel dozens of people holding their breath. I hesitated. Maybe there had been an accident. Maybe a celebrity had arrived. New Yorkers usually ignored famous people, but every rule had exceptions. I listened carefully before taking another step. "Excuse me," I said softly, hoping someone might answer. Nobody did. The silence answered instead. I continued forward, counting my steps the way I always did. 8 more to the corner. 7. 6. A sudden gust of wind caught my umbrella, twisting it sideways. My balance shifted. Before I could recover, someone brushed hard against my shoulder while rushing past behind me. My cane slipped from my hand. The smooth handle escaped my fingertips and clattered across the wet pavement. Instinct carried me forward. My palms reached into empty space, searching for anything solid. Instead, they met the warm fabric of a tailored overcoat stretched across an impossibly broad chest. Time stopped. I heard my own heartbeat louder than the rain. Every person around us became perfectly still. No footsteps. No whispers. No engines. Nothing. I'm so sorry," I whispered, immediately pulling my hands back. "I didn't mean to bump into you." The man didn't answer. Not right away. His breathing remained slow and controlled, close enough that I could smell cedarwood, clean rain, and faint espresso. Whoever he was, he hadn't moved an inch. Then I heard another sound. Someone nearby inhaled sharply, as though they had just witnessed something impossible. Another voice started to speak, but stopped before saying a single word. My cane remained somewhere near our feet, untouched. The stranger bent down before I could search for it. I recognized the quiet rustle of expensive fabric, then the gentle tap of the cane being lifted from the sidewalk. Instead of placing it immediately into my hand, he paused. The rain continued falling around us while the entire city seemed to wait for whatever happened next. The cane rested in his hand for one long heartbeat before I felt it slide gently back into my fingers. His touch lasted less than a second, careful and deliberate, as though he understood that independence mattered more to me than sympathy ever could. I wrapped my hand around the familiar handle and let out a quiet breath I had not realized I was holding. "Thank you," I said softly. The rain continued to fall around us, yet nobody else seemed willing to move. The silence pressed against my ears until it almost became a sound of its own. I had spent my entire life listening to people, and I knew this kind of silence did not come from surprise alone. It came from respect, fear, or both. Then the stranger finally spoke. His voice was deep, calm, and carried the quiet confidence of someone who had never needed to raise it. "Are you hurt?" he asked. It was such a simple question that it almost made me smile. I shook my head. "No, just embarrassed." A faint pause followed, almost as though he was studying me without saying a word. "There is nothing to be embarrassed about," he replied. Behind him, someone shifted their weight nervously. Another pair of polished shoes stopped several feet away. I could sense more people gathering, yet none of them interrupted him. That alone told me he was important in a way that had nothing to do with wealth. "Miss," another man finally said with obvious hesitation. "Perhaps we should." He stopped speaking before finishing the sentence. The stranger did not answer him. Instead, he asked me, "Where were you heading?" "Home," I answered honestly. "It is about 15 minutes from here. Walking. That is usually how I get there." He remained quiet again. Most strangers rushed to offer help the moment they noticed my cane. Some insisted on grabbing my arm before asking permission. Others spoke louder than necessary, as if blindness somehow affected hearing. This man did neither. He simply waited. The restraint felt unusual, comfortable even. I adjusted my umbrella and smiled politely. "I promise I will survive the walk." For the first time, I thought I heard the faintest trace of amusement in his breathing. It was subtle, almost hidden beneath the steady rhythm of the rain. "I believe you will," he said. "That does not mean I enjoy unnecessary risks." Before I could ask what he meant, several engines started almost simultaneously. Doors opened and closed with perfect coordination. Whoever these people were, they moved with remarkable discipline. "You really do have a dramatic entrance," I said before I could stop myself. The words escaped naturally, and for one terrifying second I wondered if I had offended him. Instead, someone several feet away released what sounded like a startled cough. Another person quietly muttered, "She actually said that." The stranger surprised me again. A soft laugh escaped him. It was brief, genuine, and completely unexpected. The tension surrounding us seemed to crack just enough for the air to become breathable again. "Most people are too busy pretending not to notice," he admitted. "I cannot pretend about something I cannot see," I replied. "I only notice what people sound like." Another moment of silence passed. This one felt different, curious rather than tense. "And what do I sound like?" he asked. I tilted my head slightly, listening. "Tired," I answered. "Very controlled. Like someone who carries responsibility every hour of every day." His breathing changed almost imperceptibly. It was the first real reaction I had heard from him. "Interesting," he murmured. "Nobody has described me that way before." Perhaps nobody else was listening. Somewhere nearby, a phone vibrated once before immediately falling silent. Shoes shuffled again. The city itself seemed to remember it was alive as distant traffic slowly resumed. The invisible pause surrounding us began to dissolve. I adjusted my grip on the cane once more. "Thank you for returning this," I said. "And thank you for not treating me like I am fragile." "You are not fragile," he answered without hesitation. "No," I said with a small smile. "I am simply blind." The rain softened into a gentle mist. I stepped carefully to continue toward the crosswalk, but before I had taken 3 steps, I sensed him move beside me. Not close enough to guide me. Not close enough to invade my space. Just close enough that if another careless stranger rushed past, they would reach him before they reached me. I did not question it. Somehow, without asking for protection, I already had it. We crossed the intersection together without ever agreeing to do it. I listened to the steady rhythm of his footsteps matching my pace with almost impossible precision. He never reached for my arm. He never tried to steer me. Somehow he always seemed to know exactly where I intended to step next. That alone told me more about him than any introduction could have. He respected boundaries. That was rare. New York rewarded people who pushed past one another. This stranger seemed powerful enough that the city simply moved for him instead. Halfway across the crosswalk, I noticed something else. Nobody else was walking beside us. Engines remained silent until we reached the opposite sidewalk. The traffic light could not possibly have stayed green that long, yet no impatient driver leaned on a horn. No bicycle rushed between us. Even the usual chorus of hurried footsteps stayed several yards away. It was as though an invisible circle surrounded him, and every person instinctively understood they should not enter it. I stopped near the corner and turned my face toward the sound of his breathing. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Yes." "Why is everyone afraid to walk near you?" For the first time since we met, complete silence settled between us again. Somewhere behind him a man quietly cleared his throat. Another whispered something too softly for me to understand before immediately falling quiet. The stranger finally answered with calm honesty. "People are often uncomfortable around influence." I smiled. That sounds like a very polite way to avoid my question. His response came with another faint laugh that seemed to surprise even the people standing around him. "Perhaps it is. Does that usually work?" "Usually. Not tonight." He accepted the answer without offense. I appreciated that. Too many people confused confidence with the need to win every conversation. This man did not. "You asked direct questions, Clara." My smile disappeared. "I do not remember telling you my name." The rain suddenly sounded louder. My fingers tightened around the handle of my cane. He had never introduced himself either, yet somehow he knew exactly who I was. I searched my memory, replaying every word we had exchanged since bumping into each other. I had apologized. I had mentioned going home. I had never said my name. "How do you know that?" I asked quietly. Another pause followed. "Your identification badge," he answered. "When your umbrella turned inside out, it slipped from your coat pocket. I noticed it while picking up your cane." Relief mixed with embarrassment. "That makes sense. Would you like it back?" I blinked, then laughed at myself. Apparently, I should stop dropping things tonight. A small plastic card slid gently into my hand. Our fingers brushed for only an instant before separating again. "Thank you." "You are welcome." I slipped the badge into my pocket and shook my head. "My students would tell you I am usually much more organized than this." "You teach piano at a nonprofit music center for children with visual impairments." His breathing slowed slightly, thoughtful rather than surprised. "You spend your evenings helping other people." "Most of them help me more than I help them." He considered that for several seconds. "Not many people believe that." "Perhaps they should." A quiet voice approached from several feet away. "Sir, we are running behind schedule." The words were respectful but careful, spoken by someone clearly accustomed to waiting for permission before saying anything. The man beside me did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked, "Do you always walk this route home?" I hesitated. It was an ordinary question, yet something about the way he asked made it sound important. "Almost every Thursday." "Then I hope the rain is kind to you next week as well." Before I could respond, I heard him step backward. Several other footsteps moved with him in perfect synchronization. Car doors opened once more. Engines came alive. Within moments, the strange stillness that had surrounded the block vanished completely. Horns echoed in the distance. Pedestrians resumed talking. Someone hurried past carrying shopping bags. The city had remembered how to breathe. I stood alone beneath my umbrella, listening to the fading sound of a black convoy disappearing into the night, wondering why meeting one polite stranger had left me feeling as though my ordinary life had quietly changed forever. I slept poorly that night, not because I was frightened, but because my mind kept replaying the sound of his voice. Faces faded from memory for most people. Voices stayed with me forever. His had carried a strange contradiction. It was calm enough to lower my guard and heavy enough to make an entire city pause. By the following morning, I convinced myself that I had simply crossed paths with someone important. New York was full of influential people. There was no reason to believe I would ever meet him again. I left my apartment just after 8 carrying a canvas bag filled with sheet music, Braille lesson books, and small rhythm instruments for my youngest students. The air smelled cleaner after the storm. Sunlight warmed my face even though I could not see it. I always liked mornings because they belonged to ordinary people. Parents hurried children toward school. Delivery trucks unloaded fresh bread outside neighborhood bakeries. Dog walkers exchanged cheerful greetings with complete strangers. Life felt predictable again. When I reached the music center, something immediately felt different. The receptionist, Melissa, usually greeted me with a quick hello before returning to the phone. Today she walked toward me so quickly that I heard the heels of her shoes striking the hardwood floor. "Clara," she whispered. Something unbelievable happened this morning. I smiled. Good morning to you too. She laughed nervously. Someone donated 3 brand new pianos. I stopped walking. 3 grand pianos. I thought I had misheard her. Our nonprofit had spent years raising money just to repair old instruments. The children practiced on upright pianos with chipped keys and worn pedals that squeaked whenever they were used. A gift like this belonged to famous conservatories, not our tiny school. Who donated them? I asked. Nobody knows. They arrived before sunrise with a handwritten note. What did it say? Melissa hesitated before reading the message aloud. Every child deserves to hear possibility. I felt something tighten quietly inside my chest. There was nothing unusual about the sentence itself. Kind people wrote thoughtful notes every day. Yet somehow I remembered another sentence from the night before. There is nothing to be embarrassed about. The same calm simplicity. The same careful choice of words. I pushed the thought away immediately. New York had millions of generous people. It was foolish to connect 2 strangers simply because they both sounded composed. The morning lessons began as usual. Tiny fingers searched across piano keys. Children laughed whenever someone missed a note and celebrated every small success as though they had filled Carnegie Hall. Watching them learn had always reminded me that progress rarely arrived all at once. It arrived one note at a time. During lunch, I stepped outside with a cup of coffee and found my favorite bench beneath a maple tree whose leaves had already begun falling across the sidewalk. The breeze carried the scent of fresh grass from the small park across the street. I listened to buses stopping, bicycles passing, and students chatting while they hurried between classes. Then every familiar sound changed. Conversations faded. Footsteps slowed. A car engine settled into a smooth idle only a few yards away. My heartbeat skipped before I could explain why. I recognized the quiet discipline before I recognized anything else. Several doors opened with perfect timing. Expensive shoes touched the sidewalk one after another. Nobody spoke above a whisper. I remained seated, staring toward nothing but sunlight against closed eyes. Slowly, I lowered my coffee cup. Without seeing a single face, I already knew that the ordinary rhythm of my day had just disappeared again. The familiar hush settled over the sidewalk several seconds before I heard his footsteps. By then I no longer believed in coincidence. I placed my paper coffee cup carefully beside me and smiled toward the sound of polished shoes approaching across the pavement. You certainly have a remarkable way of interrupting an ordinary afternoon, I said. His footsteps stopped a comfortable distance away. Do I? He asked, his voice carrying that same quiet steadiness I had remembered all night. You do. The city becomes strangely polite whenever you arrive. For a brief moment, nobody else breathed loudly enough for me to hear. Then I caught the faintest hint of amusement in his voice. Perhaps people simply enjoy peaceful afternoons. I laughed softly. No, this feels different. A breeze carried the scent of cedarwood again, mixed with fresh espresso. Somehow that combination had already become unmistakably his. May I sit? He asked. The question surprised me. Most people assumed the empty half of a public bench belonged to anyone. He asked anyway. Of course, I replied. I heard the quiet rustle of an expensive coat as he settled beside me, leaving enough space that neither of us felt crowded. We listened to the wind moving through the maple leaves for several seconds before either of us spoke again. How are your students today? He asked. I turned toward him, genuinely surprised. You remembered. You said they help you more than you help them. I smiled. They do. They also received 3 beautiful grand pianos this morning from a mysterious donor. His breathing remained perfectly steady. That sounds like fortunate timing. It does. I tilted my head slightly. Do you believe anonymous kindness still exists? I would like to believe it does. Even among powerful people. Another thoughtful silence followed. Power does not always erase generosity, he answered. Sometimes it simply hides it. His words lingered in my thoughts longer than I expected. There was no arrogance in them. Only certainty. You still have not told me your name, I said. Dominic. He spoke it simply, as though it needed no explanation. Dominic, I repeated. It suits your voice. Does it? Strong. Calm. Slightly mysterious. I heard him exhale what sounded almost like another quiet laugh. I have been called many things. Mysterious is one of the kinder descriptions. Then I will keep using it. A nearby phone vibrated before someone quickly silenced it. Another pair of footsteps approached, and stopped several feet away. "Sir," a respectful voice said, "the meeting." Dominic answered without raising his voice. 5 minutes. The man immediately stepped back without another word. I shook my head in disbelief. People really do listen when you speak. Sometimes. They listen immediately. He did not deny it. Instead, he changed the subject. "Melissa mentioned that your roof leaks during heavy rain." My eyebrows lifted. "You know Melissa?" "No." "Then how could you possibly know about our roof?" This time his silence lasted longer. I listened carefully, waiting for an answer that never came. Finally, he said, "The children deserve better conditions for learning." My heart skipped. "Dominic." "Yes." "Were the pianos from you?" The breeze stopped. Even the leaves seemed to wait. He answered so quietly I almost missed it. "Does it matter who paid for them if they help the children?" I lowered my gaze toward the warmth of the afternoon sun against my hands. "It matters because gratitude deserves the right address." "Then thank your students," he replied. "If they did not exist, there would have been nothing worth giving to." Before I could respond, I heard laughter from the music center as several children spilled into the courtyard for recess. One little boy called my name excitedly and began running toward the bench. His small sneakers slapped against the sidewalk with joyful abandon. Without thinking, Dominic stood before the child reached us, not to stop him, but to make certain the boy did not trip over the uneven edge of the walkway. The little boy reached me safely, laughing as though nothing unusual had happened. I smiled, but somewhere deep inside I realized something I could no longer ignore. The most intimidating man I had ever met instinctively noticed dangers before anyone else did. Yet every choice he made around me seemed designed to leave me feeling stronger instead of protected. The little boy wrapped his arms around my waist before racing back toward the playground with the unstoppable energy that only children possess. His laughter echoed across the courtyard until it blended with the cheerful sound of piano scales drifting through the open classroom windows. I could almost picture the smiles on their faces even though I had never seen them. "They trust you," Dominic said quietly beside me. "Children know when someone listens," I replied. "Adults usually hear words. Children hear hearts." He did not answer immediately. The silence between us no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt familiar, like the pause between two movements of a favorite song. Finally he spoke. "Who taught you to think that way?" I smiled to myself. "My grandmother. She lost her hearing when she was older. She used to tell me that when one door closes, another sense learns how to love the world differently." I reached down and brushed a fallen maple leaf from the bench. She also believed that every frightened person is carrying a story nobody else can hear. Dominic inhaled slowly. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. Another gentle breeze carried the laughter of my students across the courtyard. "She passed away 5 years ago. I am sorry." "Do not be. She spent 90 years teaching people how to be kind. That is a beautiful way to leave the world." I heard him shift slightly beside me, the quiet movement of expensive fabric against polished wood. "Kindness is becoming rare." "No," I answered. "It is becoming quieter." He turned those words over in silence. "What makes you believe that?" "Because anonymous people keep donating pianos to little schools." He let out another soft laugh that disappeared almost as quickly as it came. "You are persistent. I teach children. Repeating questions is part of the job." Before he could respond, the front door opened. Melissa hurried toward us, breathing slightly faster than usual. "Clara, I hope I am not interrupting." "Not at all. A construction company just called." I frowned. "Construction company?" "They said they would like to inspect the roof this afternoon. They already have permits. They said everything has been prepaid." I slowly turned my face toward Dominic. That would not happen to be another coincidence, would it? He remained silent long enough to answer without speaking. Melissa excused herself, sensing there was something personal in the conversation, and quietly returned inside. I folded my hands together around my cane. "Dominic." "Yes. I appreciate generosity more than you probably realize." "I know, but I cannot accept someone quietly changing my entire workplace without even asking." "Why not?" His question held genuine curiosity instead of offense. "Because this school belongs to the children and the community. They deserve honesty." "Would you have said yes if someone asked first?" I thought about it carefully. "Probably." "Then the children lose nothing." I smiled sadly. "You still do not understand. Help me. When people solve every problem for someone else, they accidentally take away the chance to stand beside them. Sometimes asking for permission is another way of showing respect. He did not speak for several long seconds. The courtyard became wonderfully ordinary again as children chased one another through piles of colorful leaves. Somewhere nearby a bell chimed the half-hour. At last Dominic said, "Nobody has ever explained it to me that way." Then perhaps nobody ever dared. I heard him stand from the bench. Perhaps. His voice sounded different now. Softer. Thoughtful. "Clara. Yes. If I have crossed a line, I will remember what you said." I stood as well, resting one hand on my cane. Good. Because I would rather have an honest friend than an invisible guardian. Those words seemed to stop time for only a heartbeat. He did not answer immediately, and when he finally spoke, there was something unexpectedly warm beneath his calm voice. "That may be the first gift anyone has offered me in a very long time." The roof inspection began the very next morning, and for the first time in years I heard excitement louder than worry inside the music center. Children gathered near the lobby asking questions about paint colors, new practice rooms, and whether the old squeaky piano bench would finally retire. Their hope filled every hallway more completely than any renovation ever could. I spent the morning teaching beginner scales, clapping rhythms, and reminding one determined 8-year-old that mistakes were simply notes waiting to find the right place. By early afternoon, the workers paused for lunch, and the building settled into a comfortable quiet. I stayed behind to organize braille sheet music while Melissa stepped out to pick up sandwiches for everyone. I was reaching for a stack of lesson books when I heard someone enter the classroom. The footsteps were familiar before a single word was spoken. Calm, measured, unhurried. "You have perfect timing," I said without looking up. "Do I?" Dominic asked. "Only if you plan to arrive exactly when 30 children are talking about you without knowing your name." A gentle silence followed. "What are they saying?" "They think an angel paid for their new pianos." I smiled. I decided not to correct them. He laughed quietly, the sound warmer than I had heard before. "That seems unfair. Only if the angel wants credit." I heard him walk closer until he stopped beside the piano. His hand rested lightly on the polished wood, and I could hear his fingertips brushing across the smooth finish. "It sounds different in here," he said. "Hope changes acoustics," I replied. "Rooms remember joy." He remained quiet, as though trying to understand how someone could describe a building that way. Then he asked, "Do you ever wish your life had been easier?" It was an unexpected question. I considered it honestly before answering. No, never. If I had lived an easier life, I might never have discovered how generous ordinary people can be, even after losing your sight, especially after losing it. I rested my hands on the edge of the piano. Blindness taught me something I probably would never have learned otherwise. What is that? The world tells the truth through actions long before it tells the truth through appearances. Dominic did not interrupt. People can smile while planning to leave. They can look confident while feeling broken. But footsteps, breathing, hesitation, kindness, patience, those things are much harder to disguise. I turned slightly toward him. "You hide many things, Dominic, but you have never hidden respect." His breathing caught almost imperceptibly. "You notice more than most people who can see." Listening has always been my strongest habit. Outside the classroom, a child suddenly called my name. "Miss Clara, can you help me?" "One moment," I answered. The little girl hurried inside, carrying a violin case almost as large as she was. "I cannot fix the bow," she said sadly. I knelt beside her, gently adjusted the loose screw, tightened the horsehair just enough, and placed the instrument back into her hands. "Try now." She played 3 careful notes before breaking into delighted laughter. "It works. Wonderful." She hugged me quickly before running back into the hallway. Dominic had not spoken during the entire exchange. When the room became quiet again, he asked softly, "Do they always trust you that easily?" "Children do not care about status," I answered. "They care about consistency. I do not think anyone has ever trusted me that way." His voice carried no self-pity, only quiet observation. I slowly reached toward the sound of his voice until my fingertips rested gently against the sleeve of his coat for only a brief second. "Then perhaps," I said, "you have spent too much time surrounded by people who feared disappointing you instead of people who felt safe enough to be honest." He did not move away. Neither did I. The silence between us felt peaceful rather than uncertain. Then, somewhere in the hallway outside, One of the construction supervisors greeted another visitor with unusual nervousness. The conversation stopped almost immediately, replaced by whispers that drifted through the open doorway. Dominic's posture changed so subtly that almost nobody else would have noticed it. I heard it in his breathing before I heard it anywhere else. Whatever had just arrived outside, it belonged to the part of his life he had carefully kept hidden from me. The whispers outside the classroom never became loud enough for the children to notice, but they were more than enough for me. Fear has its own rhythm. It slows breathing. It shortens sentences. It leaves unfinished thoughts hanging in the air. I heard a construction supervisor greet someone with careful respect before quickly stepping aside. Another pair of polished shoes crossed the hallway. Whoever had arrived was not expected, and everyone knew it. Dominic remained perfectly still beside me, yet the silence around him changed. It was no longer peaceful. It became watchful. "You should finish your lesson," he said quietly. "That sounds more like a suggestion than a goodbye," I replied. "Perhaps it is both." I smiled gently. "Whatever is happening outside, I hope nobody forgets there are children in this building." He answered without hesitation. "Nobody will." There was such certainty in those 3 words that I believed him immediately. He stepped toward the doorway before another voice greeted him. "Mr. Vale." The words carried obvious respect. "The visitors insisted on speaking with you personally." Dominic remained calm. "Not here. They said it cannot wait." A brief silence followed before he answered. "Everything can wait until the children finish their afternoon lessons." My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the piano. It was not what he said that stayed with me. It was the way everyone accepted his decision without argument. Their footsteps slowly retreated farther down the hallway until only distant murmurs remained. I turned toward the sound of his breathing again. "You keep protecting this place," I said softly. "It deserves peace." "No," I answered. "You are choosing peace." He did not respond. Instead, he walked back into the classroom and gently closed the door behind him. The click of the latch felt strangely comforting. Moments later, tiny footsteps hurried inside. Several children gathered around the piano asking if they could play the new instruments before class officially started. One at a time, I laughed. "Music sounds much better when we take turns." Dominic remained quietly near the back of the room while the children introduced themselves without the slightest idea who he was. One little girl tugged gently on his coat sleeve. "Mister, are you Claire's friend?" The entire room became silent. I imagined every adult waiting for his answer. Dominic did not hesitate. "I hope I am." The little girl seemed satisfied immediately. "Then you have to clap after I finish my song." She hurried back to the piano before he could answer. I smiled to myself. Children had a remarkable way of assigning responsibilities. The performance lasted less than 2 minutes. Tiny hands searched carefully across unfamiliar keys, while hesitant notes slowly became a recognizable melody. When the last note faded into the room, Dominic applauded first. Not loudly, not dramatically, simply with genuine appreciation. The other children joined him until joyful applause filled every corner of the classroom. For the first time since meeting him, I heard something unexpected. Relief. It escaped him in a slow breath that almost sounded like gratitude. After the children returned to their practice groups, I quietly walked toward him. "You enjoyed that," I said. "Very much. You sound surprised." I had forgotten what honest applause sounded like. His answer lingered in my heart. Honest applause. Not obligation. Not fear. Just simple appreciation freely given. Outside, the distant conversations had disappeared completely. Whatever business had brought those visitors here was gone. The building belonged to music again. As the afternoon sunlight warmed the windows, I reached into my canvas bag and found a small braided friendship bracelet one of my youngest students had made that morning. She had insisted I give it to someone who looked lonely. I smiled at the memory and gently held it toward Dominic. "Would you do me a favor?" "If I can." One of my students believes every lonely person deserves something made with kindness. I think she would be disappointed if I kept this for myself. He accepted the bracelet with surprising care, turning it slowly between his fingers without speaking. Finally, his voice became almost a whisper. "Nobody has ever given me something this simple." "Perhaps," I answered, "because they assumed you already had everything." The room fell quiet once more, but this silence felt entirely different from the one that had surrounded us on that rainy street. This one carried hope, And somehow I knew that whatever walls Dominic Vale had spent years building around his heart, they had just begun to crack in the gentlest possible way. Autumn arrived quietly after that afternoon, carrying cooler air, longer shadows, and a sense that life had begun measuring time differently. The construction crews finished repairing the roof, fresh paint brightened every classroom, and music once again became the loudest sound inside the little school. My students noticed every improvement with the kind of gratitude adults often forgot how to express. One little boy ran his fingers across the polished piano and whispered that it felt like touching a dream. I smiled because I understood exactly what he meant. Some gifts changed buildings. Others changed people. Dominic continued to appear without warning and disappear just as quietly. Sometimes he arrived with nothing more than a cup of coffee he somehow remembered I preferred. Other times he simply sat through an entire lesson without interrupting a single note. He never asked for recognition. He never expected gratitude. He simply listened. The children accepted him long before the adults did. They asked him impossible questions only children could ask. Why did he always wear dark suits? Why did everyone seem so polite around him? Why did he never smile until someone else smiled first? Dominic answered each question with surprising patience, and little by little the invisible distance surrounding him began to fade. One Friday afternoon, after the last lesson ended, I found him standing alone near the practice rooms. I recognized the quiet rhythm of his breathing before I heard anything else. "You are thinking too loudly again," I said with a smile. He laughed softly. "Can you hear that too?" "Only when it matters." We walked slowly toward the front entrance together. Outside, children hugged their parents. Buses arrived one after another, and the ordinary sounds of the neighborhood wrapped around us like familiar music. "Clara," he said after a long silence, "may I ask you something?" "You may." "The night we met, you asked why everyone seemed afraid of me." "I remember." "You never asked again." I rested both hands on my cane. "Because I realized the answer would come when you were ready to tell me, not when I was curious enough to demand it." He stood quietly beside me for several moments before speaking. "Most people decide who I am before they ever speak to me." "I know. You never did." I smiled gently. "I could not see your reputation. I only heard your choices." The afternoon breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves across the sidewalk. Somewhere nearby a church bell marked the hour. Dominic spoke so quietly I almost missed the words. "My world has never been simple, Clara. Neither has mine. There are responsibilities I cannot simply walk away from. I am not asking you to." He seemed surprised. "You are not." I shook my head. "People are more than the hardest parts of their lives. Every day I teach children who believe one missed note ruins an entire song. It never does. The next note always matters more." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then I felt something lightly touch my hand. Dominic had returned the small braided bracelet I had given him. "Did you not like it?" I asked. "I liked it more than you know." He gently closed my fingers around it again. "But I believe it belongs with the person who reminded me that kindness cannot be purchased." I smiled. "Then keep one promise instead. Name it. Whenever life gives you the choice between being feared and being remembered for kindness, choose kindness first." His answer came without hesitation. "I will try. That is all anyone can promise." A little girl suddenly ran toward us from the playground. "Miss Clara," she called happily. "Are you coming back on Monday?" I laughed. "Of course I am." She looked up at Dominic. "And you?" He paused just long enough for hope to settle into the silence before answering. "If Miss Clara will allow it." The little girl clapped excitedly. "Good. Every music school needs someone who remembers to clap." She skipped away before either of us could respond. Dominic and I stood together listening to her laughter disappear into the afternoon. Then he quietly said, "You once told me that children hear hearts." "They do." "Then perhaps they heard mine before I did." I smiled toward the sound of his voice, grateful that I had never needed sight to recognize the person standing beside me. Some people spend their entire lives searching for light with their eyes. I found mine by listening to a heart that had almost forgotten how to be heard.